There have been no requests for local board input, and I come to item 8, extraordinary business. I have received a request from Councillor Casey to discuss the bus drivers' industrial dispute, and I've worked with Councillor Casey and with a number of you on what I think is an appropriate resolution to pass. I think that Councillor Casey's request for a discussion under extraordinary business does meet the criteria for that, and I intend to move forthwith to the consideration of the industrial dispute as an extraordinary item, and I'll ask Councillor Casey to speak to that, please.
And I understand that, first of all, I just have to explain why it's an extraordinary item. So on Saturday, just past, 800 bus drivers were suspended by New Zealand Bus after driving the buses all week and not collecting fares. So that we were blindsided by that. I say I was blindsided by that. I guess that we all were. And it's now Wednesday, and today's date is Thursday, thank you. Today's Thursday. Today's date is the 12th of December. In 13 days' time, it's Christmas Day. We have 800 bus drivers and their families who aren't being paid and haven't been paid since Saturday. We've got commuters across Auckland who can't get to work, who can't get to the shops, who can't do their normal business. And I think that it's incumbent upon us as a council to have a say in the resolution of that. And, you know, the Mayor did say, which prompted us yesterday, that he didn't think it was appropriate for council to be involved. I think we all realise now if council's not involved, this is going to be a protracted dispute. And I would like to see over tomorrow. I think that's what we all would like. So this is about finding a way through this with our help to get the bus drivers back to work. That's what they want. I'm sure that's what New Zealand Bus wants. I'm sure that's what Auckland Transport wants. That's what this council wants. So let's work together to make it happen. That's all this is about. It can't wait till February. That's our next governing body meeting. If this dispute is still ongoing in February, then we'll be out of a job, quite frankly. So it is our job to advocate on behalf of these bus drivers, and that's what I'm intending to do if you hear me out at the extraordinary business item.
Sorry, Councillor, this is the extraordinary business item now. So I said sorry, you might have missed it.
I thought we had to pass it as a council.
Oh, well, sorry, you've got to pass it first, yes.
Oh, well, that was my speech asking you to accept the extraordinary business.
That's okay. And I've seconded that we'll accept that. So I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no, carried. And now we come to the resolution, which is on the screen now. It's something that I've talked to Councillor Casey about and a number of other councillors. I'm sorry I haven't had the chance to talk to everybody. But I think if we deal with this now, I'll ask you to move that recommendation, Councillor Casey, and I'll second it.
And can I speak now to the resolution? Okay. Councillors, if your phone on your emails or anything like mine, you'll know that the public of Auckland is very, very unhappy at the moment. And actually, they're not unhappy at the bus drivers. They're unhappy at New Zealand Bus suspending the 800 bus drivers. And they suspended them on Saturday, and it was a blow to everybody. Now there are no buses, and about 60%, is it 60% are running, 30 to 35% are not running. If you need a bus to get to work, you are really struggling with additional costs. You need to get an Uber, you need to get a taxi, you need to pay for parking, you need to carpool, you need to get yourself to work. It's not easy. People are suffering. People are losing they're not losing jobs just quite yet, but I can tell you this, if this goes any longer, then people will be struggling real hard to keep their job if they have no means to get to work. And you will all know people who are in that category. So we are Auckland councillors. We are leaders in our community. We are meant to advocate on behalf of people without a voice. The public of Auckland right now wants the bus drivers back to work. We understand that New Zealand Bus and the unions are poles apart. What can we do as a council? What can Auckland Transport do to bring them together, to look at the conditions of service, a sustainable outcome into the future? In our Auckland plan, we say, and I'll quote, we say, we want people to go across the region easily, safely and sustainably. Right now, easily, Took me an hour to get in my car from Mount Albert this morning. No, that's not possible when there are no buses. Safely, try driving in rush hour. That's absolutely not safe. Definitely not going on my bike. Absolutely not. Sustainably? You kidding me? Fossil fuels? Have you seen the motorways since Saturday morning? Have you seen them? Absolutely chock. If they've ever been chock in the south, I don't know what you're like now. I'm hoping to hear from you down south. So, we're asking people to pay more when they're already struggling. And it's just not acceptable. So, what I'd like to ask you to support unanimously is that we ask our Chief Executive to look at options to solve this. And there will be options. I know that not all the options have been put on the table. And sometimes it's not just about a bucket of money. It's about other things. It's about, do you know, for example, the bus drivers go out on a shift and then sit around for 4 hours unpaid and then go back out in their shift? Imagine if you're coming from the south, Daniel, you drive to work at 5 a.m, you do a bit of your shift, you sit around for another 4 hours unpaid, you do the second bit. What time do you get home and how do you feel? People love our bus drivers. They love our buses. They take us to where we want to go. We support them. One way of supporting them now is to ask the Mayor to look for solutions, ask our Chief Executive to help them, ask New Zealand, ask Auckland Transport to step in. Unfortunately, we didn't get the chance to put any questions formally to Auckland Transport this morning, which is a great shame, because I wanted to ask them what steps they have taken to date on this. Have they discussed it? Has their board discussed it? What does the board think of the suspensions? What role does Auckland Transport play in this? What role do we play in it? I am completely at your disposal. I think we do have a role, and I think we need to absolutely unanimously support these resolutions today and make this dispute end tomorrow, because it is possible. It is possible.
Thank you, Councillor. If I can take a call in seconding the resolution, it's in 4 parts. The first part notes with concern the impact of the industrial dispute, and first and foremost, we think on the commuters that rely on the buses to get to work, particularly at this time of the year. We think of the impact that the dispute has on the families of the bus drivers who are without an income while the dispute goes on. And we think of the impact on what all of us around this table want to see, which is a shift for people choosing to use public transport rather than a private motor vehicle. And of course, for them to make that choice, we need our services to be reliable, to be there when people need them, and the dispute means that those services aren't there. The second part of the recommendation requests Auckland Transport to work with New Zealand Bus, the employer, and the relevant unions to find a solution. The third requests Auckland Transport and our Chief Executive to work on a sustainable long-term solution. And the last, and I think the most important, is that I should write to the Minister of Transport on behalf of Council, seeking that we move with urgency on the PTOM review. And we need to move with urgency because as our bus fleet increases, we're having increasing difficulty in recruiting and retaining bus drivers. Fundamentally, if you want to expand the bus service and you need the people ready and willing to take on that responsibility and utilise their skills to drive, the occupation has to be attractive. It's not sufficiently attractive at the moment, otherwise we wouldn't have a shortage of bus drivers. It's not attractive because for the responsibility you bear as a bus driver, you don't get paid extravagantly to carry out that responsibility. You have, as Councillor Casey mentioned, often have to deal with split shifts, and that's really difficult and disruptive in the life of those who are driving. We competitively tender for bus services under the PTOM model, and there needs to be an element of ensuring that the service we choose is the best service. But what we don't want to see is a race to the bottom where we are incentivising our bus companies to hold down artificially the wages of those who perform that service in order to secure the contract. And the Minister of Transport has acknowledged that, and there are two separate reviews that are taking place at the moment. One arises out of the Memorandum of Understanding on the Employment Relations Act, the working party set up there to deal with meal breaks and rest breaks. And as you know, we have already, as a consequence of the Employment Relations Act amendment, we have put money aside to ensure that those meal and rest breaks can be provided when they ought. It's in nobody's interest to have bus drivers that are driving at the time when they feel tired, or they haven't eaten, or they haven't had a toilet stop, or whatever. So that's one important piece of work that is happening right now. The second is, as announced by the Minister, the Public Transport Operating Model Review. And what in this resolution I want that review to do is, and I'll quote from the recommendation, to ensure that the problems of recruitment and retention of bus drivers are addressed. That is actually necessary for us to provide a service that operates effectively, but also to ensure a fair and equitable resolution is reached around drivers' wages and working conditions. What I've said I don't want to do is become involved in the dispute around the collective agreement. That is an industrial dispute. Positions are adopted by either party. They change day by day. I'm advised that there is a new offer on the table. I don't know what it is, and it's not my role to be an arbitrator, and it's not my role to be a mediator. I don't have those particular skills, and I don't think we actually want to go back to the days of arbitration that we left behind us with the ICNA Act. But I do want to see bus drivers get a fair go, and I do want to see the ability of the bus companies, without feeling under pressure from us, to pay a reasonable wage for the job. We've worked really hard around this table to give a living wage, and we want to make sure that our bus drivers are paid appropriately. So I think the best way that we can be constructive is not to intervene in the midst of the dispute when the parties are negotiating, and we don't want to stand between the parties. We don't want to create excuses for either side not to confront the issues and resolve the issues. But we do want to demonstrate that we will take the action through PTOM to make sure that the funds are there so we can properly recruit, retain and pay a fair wage to people, and that's why I'm seconding this resolution. Are there any further discussions? We've got Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks. I'll be brief and start by thanking Councillor Casey for putting this forward as an extraordinary item today, because in amongst everything that's been said, we do have a situation here which runs the risk of escalating. There's replacement services at one stage here, that was being sent out to one part of Auckland, and protesters trying to stop them or getting on the bus. So in any situation like this, where feelings are running high, I think things can get out of hand. Have a look in South America for what happens when you sit on your hands over a protracted period of time. And in the past, we have been open to that accusation that we've kept our distance. I mean, in some ways we could be open to that accusation with the ports, where there's the veritable bushfires of the port potential disposal, when they say, well, what's Auckland Council view? And well, what is it? We haven't had a meeting. And similarly in instances like this, and I'm not questioning the Mayor's assertion of keeping out from the specifics of the negotiation, but we are there to represent people, and I think this has actually highlighted a concern that we've been perhaps overlooking, and that is the human face of the public transport system. We were rushing out buying big shiny new trains and lovely big double-deckers flying up and down the Northern Motorway. Who are the people at the heart of that, both in terms of control of the piece of equipment itself, but also in terms of the interface with the people that we want to get on and use this service in increasing numbers. Well, it's the bus drivers, of course. And when you look at the mechanics of their working day, and I'm somewhat ashamed to say I thought those split shifts of that magnitude had gone back in the 1970s or 80s, but they haven't. If you just think of what a 12-hour shift means, if you're working from 7 to 7, driving around the streets of Auckland, that's pretty demanding. What do you do in your 4-hour slot, unless you live next door to the bus depot? What, did you sit around the smoko room for 4 hours? Or do you pay or drive or get back home to wherever that might be and then come back again? An additional cost, both in terms of time and monetary expense. So I think there's a fundamental issue there in terms of the way that working day is structured for the bus drivers, and I don't see how that's sustainable. If I'm in a job for 12 hours, we complain about sitting around here for 6 hours. You go home and you're feeling, I've had a hard day, I've been sitting in my seat for 6 hours, and you do feel tired, let's be honest, you do. Well, what's it like if you're 12 hours each day, 5-6 days a week? That's not sustainable, is it? So it's no wonder then they have a problem with recruitment and retention. And if it is a race to the bottom, which that structure, let's face it, a lot of the bidders and tenders of one sort or another, they go to the lowest cost, and we've kind of encouraged that in some respect. That's something that's not going to work over the long term, particularly when we're looking to ignite this wonderful public transport system to all parts of Auckland. So I think in as much as there's the issue here, and the immediate issue, and it is a serious issue of large numbers of people who aren't getting any income, and in the most expensive city in New Zealand, I see the drivers make appeals to people to donate to their fund, their strike fund, but I wouldn't have thought that would be overwhelming. So there's a big issue in terms of the immediate concerns for the drivers and their families, going into Christmas. But there's also these bigger issues that go to the long-term sustainability of people working 12-hour split shifts in busy, congested, driving circumstances. So I'll be looking forward to some resolution or some reasonable response to those issues over the course of the next little while as well. But needless to say, I'll be supporting this resolution.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Richard Hills.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Casey, and I know Councillor Bartley as well did a lot of work on this. I've been really concerned about PTOM for a long time. Myself, Chris Darby, and the Mayor have written to the Minister of Transport, the previous Minister of Transport, for a review. The review is underway. The crux of this problem is, if you look at PTOM, in 2011, Cabinet approved the introduction of a new framework for the provision of urban bus and ferry services, known as PTOM. And then you go down pretty fast, and the model will contribute to the government's goal for public transport. That's great. Grow patronage. That's great. But it was developed with two overarching objectives: to grow the commerciality of public transport services and create incentives for services to become fully commercial. Well, we know since 2011 we're actually subsidising public transport at a much higher rate. We're supposed to legally be funding, fares are supposed to collect 50% of the costs, but we know because we don't want to increase fares dramatically, we're now technically breaking the law by funding it 57% by subsidies and 43% by fares. The other thing this is all based on efficiency. Efficiency is good if people aren't involved, and people are involved in this this service. We rely on the people to run this system. I'm supportive of these resolutions, especially the last one. I do not want to sit here and give people false hope that we can fix this issue here, because we cannot legally do that. But my issue is, and we saw it was fantastic that the government asked for the review of PTOM. in August 2018, and it was very clear that yes, it has improved the efficiency of the service, but everything about PTOM showed it was worse for drivers' conditions, it was worse for the pay of drivers. The conditions and the way the setup is legally sitting and the way Auckland Transport has to work with NZTA signing off all those contracts under their model, it means that there is little or no wriggle room for drivers' pay. Where else are you going to find the efficiencies apart from drivers' pay and forcing people to sit in a depot for 5 hours in between shifts? So this has to change, but the model, I would love for us to purchase all the buses, to be honest, and it all be run within the council, but we know potentially that ship has sailed or there's a long way to go without the government jumping in. Because even the small amounts of additional revenue we're trying to fund Auckland Transport in our last annual budget, and this annual budget, 12 million is basically a percentage on the rates rise already. So I'm really concerned. I'm concerned when I was talking to Auckland Transport over the weekend over this, my concerns for the drivers and their families and the concerns for retention of drivers and encouraging future drivers, because we know places like Waiheke, others, they're having to cut services at the moment because we cannot keep drivers, we cannot encourage drivers, because drivers know, because they see it in the media, how terrible it is, a lot of the conditions for these drivers who probably love the actual work itself. So I'm concerned that Auckland Transport told me that the review isn't coming back till close to the election. We probably won't have a decision or a change in the PTOM model till after the election. That depends on who's elected as well, I assume, on what changes will come and how you measure the importance on people over efficiency. So I really, really want the Minister of Transport and NZTA to come back to us as soon as possible with significant changes to PTOM and the way we focus the model, because I think the efficiencies for the people on the ground who are catching the buses, I think, is getting much, much better. But the problem is the people who are doing the work, driving us around our city, it's not good at all. So we have to find that balance, but we need the government to act quickly because they've made promises to us and promises to those drivers. And, my thoughts are really with the drivers and their families, but we need an urgent way to fix this because people all over the city are affected, but especially the drivers and their families.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'll be brief. I'm prepared to support this resolution in full, and I just hope that both parties, all the parties involved, find a mutually beneficial outcome as quickly as possible. I did just want to mention that, reinforcing your point, Mr Mayor, about Auckland Council not becoming a party to this dispute. This is between the drivers and their individual contractors, their employers. Those contractors would have negotiated a margin in their contracts for risk, and that risk would include possible wage movements, I'm sure. So it is important that the resolution, I believe, didn't ask for any financial bailout by Auckland's ratepayers. That's because it would send the wrong signal to every CCO and Auckland Council contractors, those employees, that we can be used as a potential industrial relations bailing out service, which I think is the wrong signalling. So just in conclusion, yes, I'll support this resolution in full, and I do wish all parties involved speedy resolution to the issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Coon.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, for allowing this to come forward as an extraordinary item. Kia ora koutou, and thank you also to Councillors Bartley and Casey for their initiative and bringing this to us, because I think it's very symbolic that we're discussing this on the day that we had our first CCO Oversight Committee meeting, because I've heard around this table that we very much feel that we should be having more control of our CCOs and giving them far firmer direction. And this is when it is hard, when there is a dispute, and it's where we have the inclination to say, well, that's just a CCO issue and they can get on with it, and we try and remove ourselves from the issue. But this is where we as elected representatives can step up and can give a clear signal that we would like to have a good outcome, and that we acknowledge that there is some serious issues. And I think it was also very symbolic that we heard Wayne Donnelly this morning say that he would like to see the bus companies have professional drivers because they are the face of our PT, and that we do need to far improve the profession and give them proper training and proper conditions has to fall out of that. And I'm very concerned with what I've heard about the conditions of our drivers, in that it's not safe. There's all the health and safety issues around their conditions in terms of home life and poor wages, but I'm also concerned about what it means for our driving conditions, and that we have drivers who are there's a lot of churn, and so they're not getting proper training, they're not actually able to drive safely on our roads. So that has a whole lot of implications as well. So I do commend this to councillors, that we can actually seek an outcome, or look to Auckland Transport to resolve this with NZ Bus and the unions. So I think it's good that we're making that request, and also just wanted to make a point that by putting this on the table now and showing that we are committed to a long-term sustainable solution, that will also help with the negotiations, because it means that we are identifying that it's important and that we want to be part of the discussions going forward. And my understanding is that that really will help resolve the dispute now, if all the parties know that there's a longer term commitment for addressing the terms and conditions as that's been identified there in C and in D. So thank you for this opportunity to bring it forward and for us to take a stand on it, resolving this dispute and seeking better terms and conditions for drivers. Kia ora, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Just want to commend Councillor Casey for bringing this forward. That's great. Quite obviously we need to address this and address it quickly, but I'm also mindful around the need for a long-term solution and pressure brought to bear on the government around PTOM and the like. And part of the reasoning around that is we're trying to get ever larger numbers of people to use public transport. They're not going to use it if they've got uncertainty that the public transport is not going to be there. And we've heard over the last couple of days that we've got major events happening in Auckland, global events, and I'm anticipating that we want people to use public transport. And no doubt the government is aware of that. So this is a significant issue for us to resolve. And I would hope, Mr. Mayor, that we have regular reporting to us on this issue and how it's being managed, irrespective of whether it's more Auckland Transport than us, but they are a council-controlled organisation.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newman.
Look, I want to acknowledge Councillor Casey for her firm advocacy on this. I respect the sincerity of the points that she articulates and the solemnity of the moment, given the impact of what is happening. I too will vote for this. There are some ironies here, because actually I think that the first thing to acknowledge about the PTOM model, as Councillor Hills has pointed out, is the drive to commerciality. Well, there are already impacts about that in our city, and they are not evenly spread across the city. There are holes within the network. There are parts of my ward that don't have contracted bus services, let alone bus services that are operated by drivers who are working under unreasonable conditions. So I too agree that there needs to be the review of the PTOM model, but it goes deeper and it's on a more fundamental level than the recruitment and the retention of drivers. They are very important things. It also goes to the fact that the PTOM model creates a disincentive to operate and to contract services where you can't achieve any sort of fare box recovery, where there is no commerciality. and therefore there are parts of our community that are just completely off the grid, and we struggle and we fight to try and get a contracted service within the RPTP, and it is a rather lonely point of advocacy. But if there is one good thing that comes out of this dispute, I never want people to be subject to a lockout. I do hope that this raises the issue of the need to ensure that we actually get an equitable allocation of services across all parts of the Auckland region. I'm not quite sure what sustainable long-term solutions look like. Does that mean increasing the amount of revenue? Does that mean that we have to up PT fares and to squeeze down concessions because we've got to raise the amount of revenue in order to pay for the cost of these contracted services? It will be interesting to see what long-term solutions, sustainable long-term solutions, is going to look like. But I do want to say, Your Worship, that I think that the Council, simply by virtue of the commitment that you have put in the Mayor's budget proposal around the living wage, requires a consideration of conditions. This is what's said on the living wage in the proposal. To be the inclusive city, we aspire to, we must look after our low-wage workers, and that we're proud that over the last term of council, those employed directly by council and substantive CCOs now have a living wage to help them properly support their families. My point is that you cannot separate a discussion about wages without addressing the underlying conditions for which people will earn their bread. So it's a fair point. It is a fair point. I don't propose to get into a discussion as an elected member with parties about the conditions within which bus drivers work, but it's impossible to vote for changes around the living wage without reflecting on and considering the conditions within which people will work for that wage. So if you are seconding this resolution, Your Worship, I do think that you need to consider within your proposal the conditions within which people will work, including those who are contracted to provide the services to the ratepayers, including these drivers. But you can speak to that, I'm sure. So I want to thank the Councillor Casey for her resolutions, but I do point out that the PTOM model is not just simply about the conditions for bus drivers. It ought to be about how we close the gaps in the network, because there are people, including my constituents, some of the poorest people in South Auckland, who don't have bus services operating. So the transport deficit is not a new thing, it's a daily thing. And that needs to be addressed, and it won't be addressed by Auckland Transport anytime soon because they simply don't have the operating revenue to contract those services.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Shane Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I too would like to begin by just acknowledging Councillor Casey and Councillor Bartley for your work on this. I thought it was a lot of hard work in a short amount of time, so thank you for this. I like this resolution. I like this resolution because it doesn't just address the actual issue that we've got in front of us and the dispute we've got in front of us, but it also goes toward the structural issues that are driving future disputes of this type. We've had bus services where there are strikes and there are lockouts all over the place for many, many decades, and it indicates that we do have a structural issue that we need to address, and so I'm glad that this is being addressed here. Now, I agree with you, Mr. Mayor, that I don't want to get into the details of this and that while there are negotiations ongoing, but I do have to mention the issue of split shifts because it's something that's very personal and very important to me. I can't imagine what it's like to go out, do a bus route, do a shift, sit around your depot for 3-4 hours plus, go out and do another shift, then come home to find the kids already asleep. That's horrible. That's the sort of thing that we need to look at when we're talking about these structural issues and address them. around this table, we talk about trying to lift public transport rates and bus rates. Now, that is not just an issue for us in terms of how much we fund and what do we fund, but it's also a marketing exercise. It's also going out to the public and saying that your public transport services are reliable and they're enjoyable and they're things that you should do and you should leave the car at home. Now, I think this resolution gets us back on track with that argument as well. Lastly, I just want to finish up by saying that my heart is with the workers. We've got to get these workers back to work. We've got to get them earning for their families before Christmas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Sir. My comments will be brief. Firstly, Dr. Casey and Councillor Bartley, well done in bringing this to the table. I'm really glad it's before us. Sir, I just wanted to reflect on the number of bus drivers. I was going to say maybe I do have a conflict because I'm related to so many of, in our family who are bus drivers. But I just want to take a step back and remember the stories of the number of bus drivers that were speaking to me when Waka Pacific lost the contract, and a lot of those bus drivers had to go to the new company. And a lot of them feared the fact that the conditions were about to be changed, they would lose long service and all of those kinds of things. They went with it anyway because at the end of the day, they need jobs. They need to be able to bring some money home to feed the families. I start to wonder about the pressure and the anxiety that must sit over the heads of these bus drivers today as the same issues reappear, 2-3 years on from the last time the contract was signed for bus services. And it's just before Christmas. It's one of the worst times in the year where I don't know what it is about certain companies that want to restructure or have these kinds of things happen just before Christmas, but it puts huge, immense pressure on what is mostly working poor families who are doing everything they can to get by. And so I want to completely endorse the recommendations. I'm glad that this has been brought to the table. And I guess one of the reasons why I cheekily texted Dr. Casey yesterday and saying, well, I'm thinking about supporting it is because at the time I didn't think it was strong enough. Maybe that goes back to my student association days at Auckland University, where we just sat in the Vice-Chancellor's room for days until he moved. But I want to congratulate you, Mr. Mayor, for endorsing this. I think there's so much that we can do. This is about us getting involved. I don't mean this jokingly, but I know the pressures that the bus drivers are under too, because you know that when they're running a little bit late, and I've held up buses to do my 50-metre dash because the same driver has seen me and I'm 50 metres from the bus stop. That probably held up the bus about 7 minutes. But the point is that the drivers, they're under heaps of pressure. And that's just their driving pressure getting through our traffic. They're under huge pressure when their jobs are on the line. And so this is our way of saying to Auckland Transport, saying to ourselves, let's get this sorted. And we use the phrase, let's find a way forward. Well, let's do that too. Let's find a way forward that is just and that's fair, so that the bus drivers, so that the companies, so that the commuters of Auckland don't have to go back to their cars. Imagine what our emissions have been like in the last 4 days. 70,000 people alone was the projection that would have been affected on Monday. So if that's been Monday's figures, we're well into the hundreds of thousands now. And so let's get this sorted out for Auckland. Let's go to Christmas knowing that this issue has been sorted fairly and justly. So well done to my colleagues as I look at you across the table. This is why we're here. This is the stuff that should fuel us to act on behalf of all Aucklanders. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And finally, Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for allowing this to go on the agenda. Thank you, Councillors Casey, Coombe and Henderson, for your work on this. I really didn't want us to make a big deal out of it because I'm really trying to have no more drama until the end of this year. But I really felt that we had to do something and that we do have a responsibility, because at the end of the day, it's us that's, the parent of Auckland Transport, who are the ones that are contracting with New Zealand bus. And on a personal level, you know, the Panmure depot was suspended, and I go to church with a lot of those bus drivers. And they're my friends' parents. And my friends are talking about how they're going to have to cover the bills over Christmas because their parents can't pay for it. So it is very real. It's not just something we read in a report. And I'm not trying to go in hard and bat for the bus drivers because they don't stop for me when I try and get on the bus. They make me run, and then they joke about it and they go, "Oh, good run, councillor." And I'm like, "Yeah, you wait. You just wait." But I think it is the right thing to do. And this is Christmas, and I can't imagine 800 families like struggling because Christmas is already hard for people, and this is just making it worse. I support these recommendations because it does say that the drivers are important and that they're an asset. And for the life of me, I couldn't find any reference to drivers being an asset or important on the New Zealand Bus website. But that's okay, you know. No, it's not okay. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that. It is true that this bus driver's occupation is not an attractive occupation, especially with the split shifts. And I thought it was only us that worked all day and all night. But the difference is we get paid really well for it. If you factor in the split shifts for these bus drivers, they don't make a living wage. And I think, you know, if you factor all of that in, and that's not good as well, considering the stance that our council is taking in regards to living wage. I look at the Waikato Regional Council, thanks to the two from First Union, Louisa and Robert, for telling us about how that regional council got involved in their bus dispute. So, you know, it isn't something that hasn't been done before by a council. You can't go past the 70,000 bus users that are put out by this as well. And, you know, I have constituents saying to me, yeah, we're bus drivers. You know, they're affected. But then I have constituents saying to me, get our buses back out there, because we rely on those buses. So not just the 800 families, but also the 70,000 bus users. So yeah, I think that is, so that is something I want to say. And it was good to hear Auckland Transport this morning talk about wanting to do something about this industry, because we heard about one company, they had 230 drivers, and 130 of those drivers quit after a month to 6 months. So it's not an easy thing to do. So I'm really happy that we are entertaining these resolutions, and I hope it goes some way to resolving this. But thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Are there any other? Councillor Fletcher?
Thank you. I too want to add my congratulations to those who've brought this forward. When we think about it, the journey of the last 20 years has been to try and provide really first-class opportunities for Aucklanders to travel in public transport across Auckland. If we're sincere about that, and if we want to continue to see the growth in patronage, we have to give first-class conditions to those that are responsible for the services. So I give my absolute support to this and hope that the matter can be resolved in an equitable way for everyone.
Thank you very much. Well, that's 12 speeches for, none against. Nobody wishes to speak against it. You do have a right of reply if you choose to exercise it, Councillor Casey.
I just wanted to say thank you to all the speakers, and I hope that the unanimous support of this Auckland Council will send a strong message to the bus drivers who are currently on suspension.
Thank you very much. I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Declare it unanimously carried. Thank you very much.